Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, Stu. How are you doing? Looking very fine in your black there.
I know the black matches the mood at the moment, a Monday morning, all that kind of thing.
Morning. Yeah, but if people are listening to this in about a month on a Wednesday, then we're going to look.
Yeah, good point. Well, I think every day's merging into one at the moment. With
I know.
Current workloads we've all got, so.
Well, on this Conveyancing Matters chat, hopefully we're going to talk about something that might interest people, interest our lovely conveyancers and provoke a bit of interest, because we want to talk about COVID clauses, yes or no, because of course we're back in a lockdown, which frankly I suspect we're going to be sort of in and out of for the coming months, really, Stu, in one way or another. So I don't think this Conveyancing Matters chat's going to go out of date anytime soon. But of course, a really vexed issue for conveyancers, isn't it, is this issue of, should we put the so-called COVID clause in a contract or shouldn't we? And perhaps just by way of sort of scene setting, one of the many good things about the standard conditions of sale contract that we use in conveyancing is certainty. And despite the fact that it might sound a bit awful, but if you've entered into the contract to buy and sell the specified land, and somebody has a terrible life event, be it sort of a death in the family, or they lose their job or whatever, well, the big upside of certainty is that we know it's going to happen. But the downside is if somebody has a sort of personal event that causes a problem, they're still going to have to complete. You've even got to complete if you die, as we know, Stu. So there's obviously a huge amount around at the moment, and a lot of comment and some provisions going around on these so-called COVID clauses. The idea that we as conveyancers should be putting something or advising our clients to put a clause in the contract to try to deal with the COVID situation. So kick it over to you, Stu. What are your thoughts? I've got some views on this stuff. So what are you doing? What are PCS doing about this?
We don't have a standard COVID clause that we use. We don't, as a practice, put COVID clauses into our contracts. We have enhanced, I suppose would be the word, the advice that we give to our clients when they sign the contract before they commit. So for the non-lawyers out there, when we exchange contracts, the clients are going to be legally bound to buy a property on a pre-agreed date. And I suppose that the theory behind the COVID clause is that if somebody, part of the chain, buyer, seller, gets the COVID-19 in between exchange and completion, they can effectively delay completion. But for me, nothing's been tested. The COVID clauses that I see are merely sort of 2-3 lines. And as you've said at the start here, the whole point of a contract is everything's definite, everything's certain. And this is giving people sort of wriggle room, the ability to potentially, get out of maybe completing, whether they've got it or not. And not something personally I can see, that much value in. It's a real difficult one because, of course, we've got to protect our clients. And if a client asked us to put one in, we certainly would. But as a standard practice, it's not something we're doing. We're merely increasing the advice that we give to our clients and sort of spelling it out that, when you exchange contracts, you'll be legally bound to complete on that date. And if, for whatever reason, the current climate, took hold and, you couldn't get removals or you or somebody in the chain did contract COVID-19, then of course it might cause a problem. And if you don't complete for whatever reason, these are the implications. So it's really just sort of enhancing the advice that we give to a client before they enter into that contract.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, Stu, that you've sort of beefed up your existing advice. What I found interesting, sort of, maybe in some ways as more of an observer, because I sort of tend to see what a lot of firms are doing and a lot of solicitors. What I've certainly seen on Twitter and on LinkedIn in particular is conveyancers seem to have, very quite polarized views on this. some of them seem to think that, COVID clauses are the best thing since shark repellent, and we all absolutely ought to have them, and everybody's negligent if we don't deal with, if we don't have one. And other people at the other side of, the other end of the spectrum are sort of saying, well, don't like them, wouldn't touch them, etc. What I've not managed to do is to have any sort of dialogue with anybody that's a real evangelist for COVID clauses, and really explore what they're using, what precedents they're doing. And certainly there are precedents out there. So for example, the Law Society, in case anybody's interested and hasn't seen it, put a standard one together a few months ago with a number of groups involved, Bold Legal being one of them. And to be completely fair to all of those organisations, I absolutely applaud them for doing that. I think to try to, come up with, an industry standard, albeit of course, typically with the Law Society, they said, oh, well, this isn't meant to be a precedent, and no, this is only your starting point. But of course, what, the difficulty that these provisions have, Stu, and you'll forgive me if I look with one, well, first of all, is even defining what COVID is, because itself, I think scientifically, that is a moving feast. So however we might define COVID, or the regulations within which that sits now, that could easily have changed. So if anybody is being really, really, really sort of, anal about this, well, in 2 years' time, when the test case runs, you might be looking at whether or not the clause was completely meaningless because, the definition upon which it was based had changed. But of course, they try to sort of package up within these clauses the definition plus the delay events, they've tended to be called, which would then allow the parties to invoke the provisions. And of course, then it just gets terribly, terribly complicated, because you've then got within these provisions the process of sending notices to the other side, which then clearly involves the solicitors. And I mean, I won't mention which of the precedent providers this is, but they've come up with this sort of enormous, with the notes, 8-page supposed COVID clause. And they've sort of tried to sort of say that any of the following, might, trigger the use of the provision. Any illness, quarantining, shielding, or self-isolation, including but not limited to precautionary self-isolation, blah, 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 and so it goes on. And before, we started talking about this, Stu, you mentioned, of course, it's absolutely right. What we lawyers like is a bit of certainty. And, how do you prove that this event has occurred?
Yeah, see, I mean, there's too much, there's no certainty regarding any of that wording you've just used, is there? And that's the problem. And my sort of fear is that, I have a position where I can either advise the client exactly what they're about to do and the implications if they can't complete because of COVID-19, or I can advise a client that we can put this clause into the contract. But then surely my advice has to go a lot further, because I can't say to the client that, yeah, this clause is all fine, it'll all be okay, because what happens if it's not? What happens if, in a court of law, it doesn't stand up? So am I not sort of on one hand, shifting the sort of issue from one hand to another? All of a sudden I've advised the client, you're okay to contract because of this clause we've got, which has never been tested in the court of law, which contains no certainty whatsoever. I think I'm probably taking more of a risk, in my opinion, by actually having the clause in there potentially than not, because I'm setting a precedent to the client that, yeah, it'll all be okay. Don't worry, you're not going to have tons of damages sort of falling on your shoulders because you're in a chain of 10 and blah, 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 blah. I think it's sort of you're robbing Peter to pay Paul all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm completely with you on this one, Stu. I mean, funnily enough, I do think if anybody is going to try and put a COVID clause in a contract, that actually, maybe a straightforward 3-liner is the better way forward anyway. Because what is absolutely clear from these precedents is that the whole thing is based on, it's predicated on, and it's enshrined in the wording, the parties acting in good faith. And if that's sort of the basis of this, then I question the need to have all of that other guff in there. Because if you're basically saying, well, you know, as a matter of good faith, you know, the parties agree that if one of them, you know, has to delay, and you could probably almost at that point say for any reason.
Yeah.
Because if I wanted, and you know, you alluded to it, Stu, but if I wanted to, you know, be difficult or shifty, well, I could just say, sorry guys, I'm self-isolating. I wouldn't have to have any proof. And before, and these clauses originally came out before, you know, the app and before the testing and all the rest of it, before the so-called test and trace, or as somebody put recently, trace the test, because they were quite good. But you know, so now at least you probably could, you know, show the screenshot of your app where you'd been told to self-isolate. But before,
I think the word, I think the word, it could be manipulated to your advantage, couldn't it?
Absolutely.
Without doubt, that could be something that could easily happen, unfortunately. I'm not suggesting everybody wants to do that, but the whole point of exchanging contracts in the first place is that, you know, everybody's bound in, and there's not those sort of situations where people can opt out for different reasons.
I think, and also, and again, to be completely fair and quite understandably, the advice in general terms, or you know, that the Law Society gave conveyancers in this context is that you know, the risks and or the agreement, that, you know, the new clauses, everything should be explained to the client. Well, the very obvious question that comes into my mind is this is quite a complex, you know, legal provision with a huge number of what ifs. So the question I would bounce back to you and others, Stu, is to my mind, this is complex, risky advice. So surely in that instance, firms need to be, well, reserving the right to increase their legal fees if they're having to give COVID related advice. And you know, would you want to be giving this advice and the huge amount of additional work it would involve, you know, within your current fee structure? I
think the answer is no. I mean, there's zero chance of passing that cost on to a client when they've already entered into an agreement with a fixed fee for their conveyancing. Number two, we don't want to really pass advice on regarding contractual provisions that, you know, we can't sort of guarantee. I think there's got to be a line here, because surely with all these if, buts and maybes, where do you draw this line? Because, you know, what about a mortgage? Okay, all of a sudden, you know, mortgage companies in theory must be far more likely to withdraw their products at the moment with potential redundancies and stuff like that. But we always advise a client that, you know, you're contracting with your buyer or your seller. You know, you're not contracting with your bank until we use their money. Therefore, in theory, a mortgage offer can be withdrawn in between exchange and completion. Well, if we take that example, we're not sort of having sort of, you know, we're not exchanging subject to mortgage every 5 minutes.
No.
So where do we draw the line? It seems there's a massive focus on COVID-19 and the implications, but I think there's offshoots of this, you know, with I know the furlough scheme's been extended and whatnot, but, you know, there's sure to be mass redundancies, particularly in the UK, on the horizon. And therefore, you know, all of a sudden, should we be doing subject to mortgage clauses in our contracts? Now, where do you draw the line? Surely, you know, you've got to sit there, and your job is to advise your client, you know, and our advice is it's difficult at the moment. There is an increased chance, there is increased risk by doing what you're about to do. You have the choice. You can simultaneously exchange and complete on the same day if this is of concern to you. You know, it's not as if there are not other options that are out there. There are.
It's interesting, Stu, because I read another article, you know, by another conveyancer who, you know, was just excoriating about a simultaneous exchange and completion. Thought it was the best, you know, the worst thing ever. But to my mind, in the current market, the simultaneous and as I've described it is, you know, it's the least worst option. You know, I spent years teaching, you know, all around the country, but Leeds and Manchester in particular, I've always found really interesting because for years, I mean, this isn't any time recent because I've not been out face-to-face teaching for, you know, for 6 months, but they have just got into the habit up there, I think probably due to demands from the agents and their clients to do a simultaneous. They just do a simultaneous almost as a matter of course, have been doing for years on lots of transactions, because they're under so much pressure and they don't know they can get their mortgage advance in time until the day. But I've said to so many classes of people, Stu, I can't tell you, well, do you advise your clients on the consequences of a simultaneous? The fact that there's no contractual liability, we're all aiming for a date, in good faith, but if somebody doesn't meet the date, then you know, people can pull out and move on without penalty. Do you explain that to your clients? And you would be shocked at the number of people that say no, just, you know, don't do it.
Fun enough,
Right.
we have a standard report that goes out to our client. If they're looking to enter into a simultaneous arrangement, we have a standard report that goes to our client to explain what they're about to do, the consequences of doing it. That, you know, again, I just always fall back to that default position. Now, surely our job is to advise the client, not to make their decisions.
Well, that's of course the thing, isn't it? And I find myself saying this such a lot, that, you know, we advise our client instructs. We advise our client instructs. And so many people say, and they would say it to you all the time, Stu, well, what would you do? Well, okay, you know, what I would do is irrelevant. You know, my job is to explain the risk, to give the advice. The client then has to take some responsibility and weigh up on the basis of the information we've given them, you know, what they want to do. So maybe then to sort of draw this one to a close, Stu, because I think that people will find this interesting, and I hope it, you know, I'd be genuinely interested actually to see, you know, COVID clauses that other practitioners have used to, you know, that they think are going to work. But, you know, I think our conclusion is probably, well, you know, go for the simultaneous if there's any doubt, really.
Yeah, my conclusion is simply that you've got to advise your client before they enter into that contract of the implications by doing so, and that includes the current climate. You know, you've got to tell the client that, you know, it's different at the moment. We're in a lockdown too. Although the property industry can function, you know, who knows what might happen in the next few weeks? There might be further lockdowns. Maybe we can't. They have to take that information into consideration when they make their decision and instruct us that they want to go ahead. And if they, you know, feel that's too big a risk, in my opinion, then the answer is a simultaneous. Not advocating that we always do simultaneouses, but, you know, it's the client's decision to make, isn't it? Not ours. Yeah. We give them the information for them to make their decision.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, I think what a lot of people don't, you know, what a lot of people also forget is that if you have a COVID clause in a chain, all of the contracts in the chain ought to have got to have the same clause. They've got to be predicated on the same basis. And of course, the longer the chain, I think the less likely that is to happen. So so maybe on that note, Stu, we'll draw this Conveyancing Matters chat to a close. As I say, I think we might get some interesting comments. So let's look forward to that. So take care, mate.
Take care. See you soon.
Bye.